Hey friends, this is Eric the Mind Control Guy. I'm going to read you something off my computer. I've been in correspondence, not to confuse anybody, but in correspondence, I've been battling or warring with the I.R.S. since 2007, ever since I found out the truth about federal income tax, who it applies to, but more importantly, who it does not apply to. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but just like the rules of the highway, there's also, I guess you might say, rules of who taxes actually apply to as far as income tax goes. Who they actually apply to the folks who earn a living within these borders that we all share. In the old days, they called them taxpayers and non taxpayers. The taxpayers was the American government sector, as we call them today, or those who engage in what they call federal privilege, an excise tax. Non taxpayers was the American private sector, who the income tax laws, the revenue laws, did not apply to. As a matter of fact, prior to December of 1942, the private sector, you went to work, started a business, you earn a living, and you got to keep all that you earned. Period. End of discussion. Well, the War Department was running out of money to fund the war in World War II. So in December of 1942, Congress enacted a special thing called the victory tax, prior to which the American private sector didn't pay. They didn't. As a matter of fact, the American private sector didn't even fill out government tax forms. You know, these W-2s and W-4s, all these ones that we fill out today, as a condition to go to work and earn a living, which is earning a living within the borders of the United States is not a privilege, it's a right. Going to work for the federal government is a privilege. And along with that privilege, you get all kinds of perks. You know, every single holiday you get off, you get good retirement bennies and all that kind of stuff. But there's a catch. Some of that money that you earn, you have to give that back in the form of what's called income tax. Now, in the confines of the Internal Revenue Code, federal income tax, income is not something that you earn, take in, all that comes in, as in the private sector. Within the confines of the Internal Revenue Code, the term income, there's a different meaning. And it means something that you do, you engage in. Privilege. It's a privilege to work for the federal government, and your paycheck comes from the Department of U.S. Treasury. In the private sector, income means exactly what it is. All that comes in. Income. It comes in. What you earn. And it was set up many, many years ago during the founding of the country. A person's labor was never to be taxed. End of discussion. But when the War Department was running out of money, it's like, hey, we need some extra funding, so let's appeal to the private sector. Hey, if you guys want to get out here and do your patriotic duty and help fund the war effort, you can fill out these government tax forms that we all fill out in the government sector and those who engage in federal privilege. You can fill out these tax forms and have a portion of your earnings sent to the Department of Treasury. They'll send them to the War Department, help fund the war. That was in December 1942. May 29th, 1944, Congress repealed the victory tax. And everything went back to the way it was. However, the I.R.S. commissioner of the day deliberately didn't say anything, making all these private sector companies who's in private sector workers were filling out these government tax forms and having their money sent to the Department of the Treasury. They said, well, people keep sending all this money. Let's just not say nothing, see what happens. I highly suspect, I doubt he was on tape saying that or sitting in front of a TV camera saying that. But because of what's happened, I think that's what happened. Let's just not say anything and see what happens. And gradually, over a period of time, the various commissioners of the Internal Revenue Service, since May 29th of 1949, in fact, just a week or so ago, it was 77 years since the repeal of the victory tax. The IRS has been screwing the private sector, deliberately lying to the private sector for just a shade over 77 years now, since the repeal of the victory tax. And all these so-called tax professionals with their fancy degrees and all that, all their mumbo-jumbo, as far as I'm concerned, all their bullshit. You can say whatever the hell you want. You know, what was that they say old Adolf Hitler said, if you tell a lie big enough and often enough, the people will believe it. Well, that's essentially what's happened. Because the American private sector, in fact, even then, during the victory tax, it was voluntary. So when you hear people say that the people who are consider themselves American patriots, when they say that the paying of income tax was voluntary, for the private sector, it's always been voluntary. For the government sector, it was mandatory. So when they say, paying of income tax and filling out those tax forms is voluntary, they're right. But the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, starting with the commissioner on down, has been deliberately lying to the American public, the American private sector, for now just a shade over 77 years, since the repeal of the victory tax, May 29th of 1944, and you can look it up on the internet today. And of course, the IRS has scores of agents trying to hack this and hack that, all these things throughout history that talking about all this tax business. Oh, they're yanking this down, they're yanking that down, all that kind of stuff. Well, there is some stuff that's still up there. And in my correspondence war with the IRS, it's been going on since 2007, I learned a lot of things. And one thing is, it's kind of like the rules of the highway. You got different people on the highway. You got different rules that apply. Myself, when I'm at work doing my occupation, I'm a truck driver. I drive an 18-wheeler for a living. I got rules and regs that I have to go by that does not apply to somebody who rides a motorcycle, drives a car, or a pickup truck. Every 2 years, I have to take what they call a medical. We have our every 2 years, it's our medical evaluation. They give you some tests to see if they think you're still fit to drive. Okay. You know, that doesn't apply to someone that rides a motorcycle. Someone drives a car. Oh, and you go to the DMV or BMV, whichever they call it in your state. You know, you have to take an eye test to get your license renewed. But you don't take a medical, just the eye test. And they do that at the BMV or DMV. And then if you want to get in your car or on your bike and you want to go cruise, you can cruise anytime, day or night, whenever you want. As a truck driver, transporting goods under a bill of lading, I can't do that. I have 14 hours a day that I can actually work. And then within that 14 hours, I have to take a mandatory 30-minute break. And it has to be logged. And nowadays they got computer logs. You know, they got their eyes and nose and meat hooks and everything. And I can only drive 11 hours a day. That's it. And I can only work 14 hours a day. Then I have to take a mandatory 10-hour break before I can get behind that wheel and move again. You're riding a bike, you're in your private vehicle, automobile, whatever you want to call it. You can drive whenever the hell you want. See, they got different rules and regs out here. Everybody, all states, because it's federal, and that's a whole other story about federal law as opposed to state law or local city ordinance. Every state has a seatbelt law. I have to wear one in a semi. You got to wear one in your car, pickup truck, or your van. Not on a motorcycle. You got to wear a seatbelt. Why not? They could make seatbelts for them, but it would seem impractical. Some states have helmet laws. I'm thinking they tried to make it federal one time, but I guess that was heavily argued and left up to the state. But some states do have helmet laws if you're on your motorcycle. Some states do not. So some states, if you've got a helmet law, you have to wear a helmet while you are riding your motorcycle. But why not for cars? You ain't got to wear a helmet. Not even in a convertible. Now you're open. You're not within your cage. You don't have a roof on. You're in a convertible. You don't have to wear a helmet. But if you're riding a bike and your state has a helmet law, yeah, you got to ride a helmet. Same thing as with what they call the income taxes. The American private sector was never required to pay a tax on their labor. Labor was never to be taxed, period, end of story. However, since May 29th of 1944, the I.R.S. officials, starting with the commissioner on down, has been deliberately lying and deceiving the American people, the American private sector workforce in particular, into believing that they have to fork over a portion of their earnings as a right to earn a living within these borders that we all share. Government sector, federal privilege, yeah. If you want to work for the federal government and get all those perks and bennies, yeah, that's part of the deal. Not for the private sector. Never has been. Except for a short time, about 15 months during the Second World War. And Congress repealed it. And the I.R.S. commissioner of the day deliberately kept quiet, deceiving the people. You know, there's been various cases over the years, and some I have in my files. And someday I'll get to looking all those up and I will read those to you. And if the IRS hadn't hacked them off the internet, you can go look them up for yourself. Various cases where Congress and the Senate and the courts and people say, we can't believe this deceitful behavior by the IRS. If a question is asked by one of us, we the people, an answer, they demand that an answer, you have to answer. You know, I've gotten letters from the IRS, so we won't answer any more of your questions. Yeah, because you'll have to let the cat out of the bag. And an old saying out of the Farmer's Almanac I read years ago, it said, it's harder to put the cat back in the bag than it is to let it out. Yeah. I stumbled on a site a number of years ago called Fraud Aid. It was, hey, anybody committing fraud, report this to the proper authorities and we'll get on it. At the very front page, at the top of this website called Fraud Aid, it says, point blank, silence is fraud. So when the IRS, the agents of the IRS, do not answer your questions deliberately, they're committing fraud. And the IRS is allowed to run a scare campaign year after year after year, decade after decade, intimidating people into believe, you better give us a portion of your earnings or else. The IRS is by far, as far as I'm concerned, the most crooked agency ever created. Ever created by the federal government. The IRS is the most crooked. The income tax revenue laws were for taxpayers and not for non-taxpayers. You never heard of the term non-taxpayer, have you? Contrary to what some IRS official or what some tax lawyer might lead you to believe, the term non-taxpayer does not mean a tax protester or a tax resistor or a tax evader or something like that. No, bullshit. A non-taxpayer is simply somebody who doesn't come under the jurisdiction of the income tax revenue laws. You see, in the old days, the government sector was called taxpayers because they, met the criteria to be taxpayers by working for the federal government and having their paycheck come from the Department of U.S. Treasury. Non-taxpayers was the American private sector. You get out here and you learn a skilled trade, the fruits of your labor, so to speak, the money you earn, you got to keep. You worked for it, you earned it. It didn't belong to anybody but you. And the IRS, through decades of campaigning to lie and deliberately deceive the American people, and the American private sector workforce in particular, they deliberately have led people to believe that every time you earn a dime, you have to fork over a portion of that to the IRS or else. To hell with the IRS. I hate the IRS with an absolute passion. And people who have done everything they can to, bring this to light. Oh, the IRS has gone after them hook, line, with tooth and nail. IRS has gone after people. How dare you try to expose the truth? That we, the IRS, have been lying to the American people for over 77 years now. In 2001. It's June of 2021. I think I said 2001 a minute ago, but I meant 2021. Forgive me for I tend to misspeak. I'm sorry. Yeah, June of 2021. May 29th of 2021. It was 77 years to the day that Congress repealed the victory tax. And the IRS commissioner of the day deliberately kept quiet about it. Like I said, in the old days, it was taxpayers and non-taxpayers. Today, they call them government sector, private sector. But then they paint everybody with the title of taxpayer. And a so-called tax professional will deliberately lie and deceive to you and say, well, when you buy something, do you pay a tax? Well, sales tax. See, you're a taxpayer. Wrong. They are completely muddying the waters and doing, what do you want to call it? Bait and switch, whatever the hell you want to call it. Excise tax and privilege tax are synonymous, and both are used interchangeably, but they mean the same thing. And that was in one of the papers that I have. But anyway, before I get too long, I'm going to show you something. I'm going to flick my camera around, and I'm going to show you a couple things, and I'm going to read you verbatim what it said in a case called Long versus Rasmussen, or U.S. versus Rasmussen, whatever. I'll get it here in a second, and I'll get it right. But the same ruling has been made several times in the course of, the last 100 or so years. As a matter of fact, in 1972, there was a case of economy, plumbing, and heating versus U.S., and the same thing was made. In 1972, that was only 49 years ago. But anyway, I'm going to show you something real quick, and then I'm going to get off here. Okay, there it is. Long versus Rasmussen. And you can look all this up for yourself. Now, try to keep my camera straight here. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to scroll down to a part that I'm going to read to you. And this has been said a number of times in the courts. And then I'm going to show you the title of a book you can get. The man was dead on right, and he was railroaded into prison because this guy was letting the cat out of the bag. Here it is. Right here. I'm going to read this to you. And all those numbers and stuff, you can pause it and you can go look things up for yourself. But it says, the revenue laws are a code or system in regulation of tax assessment and collection. They relate to taxpayers and not to non-taxpayers. The latter are without their scope. No procedure is prescribed for non-taxpayers, and no attempt is made to annul any of their rights and remedies in due course of law. With them, Congress does not assume to deal, and they are neither the subject nor the object of the revenue laws. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. And there's been countless cases. Now, these so-called tax professionals out here, they will cite a case where somebody, with good intentions in mind, they go up in front of a court and they argue all the wrong things, and naturally the courts rule against them. Something else. A tax court is for taxpayers. A tax court is not for non-taxpayers. I got to write me yet another letter, because after all these years, now they're trying to drag me into a tax court. And I've been getting IRS to back off, hands down, for years. They let it go. It just so happens they are trying to claim that I owe them $12,000 in bullshit. And it just so happens the year of 2016, they're trying to extort $12,000 from me for. I've got a letter from the IRS that says my balance is zero. They say I don't owe them a dime. They don't owe me a dime. It's a wash, case closed. And now I got some joker 5 years later trying to extort $12,000 from me. You can look up tax code online. It's got the entire 3 million plus word monstrosity of the Internal Revenue Code. But the Internal Revenue Code only applies to who it applies to. It does not apply to who it does not apply to. And anyway, there are actual crimes that's listed that government agents can commit that they could go to prison for. In fact, Title 18 of the Code of Federal Regulations actually says this kind of stuff. And the IRS has run such a decades-long scare campaign for a long time that they think that they are the IRS. They don't answer to anybody. Congress created the IRS, and I think it's high time that Congress either put the IRS out of existence or castrate the power of the IRS and get back things the way they used to be. And people say, what about flat tax? How about no? How about fair tax? How about no? And they say, you got to pay your fair share. There's not a fair share tax. There's two kinds of people that earn a living within this country. Those who are required to pay federal income tax, and those who are not even required to fill out government tax forms. You earn a living, you keep what you earn, because virtually everything you buy is taxed. But there was never to be any tax on your labor. End of discussion if you're in the American private sector. And the IRS has been lying to people for now just a shade over 77 years. I got one more thing to show you. This book here, Cracking the Code, The Fascinating Truth About Taxation in America by Pete Eric Hendrickson. He's the guy in modern times that exposed it, about the two different people who earn a living within these borders that we all share, taxpayers and non-taxpayers. And he was railroaded into prison. Show you something else. This is the back of Pete's book. You can pause this and read this. Internal Revenue Code, at least back when he wrote it, 3,413,780 word monstrosity. I'll show you something else.